Hey everybody, welcome to another week of the Deeper Waters podcast. We're really excited that you are tuning in with us this week. It's Andrea here, joined by Brandon and Joel this week.
Hey, what's up?
Hello.
We're excited to dive into today's conversation, but before we get there, just a couple of reminders for you. This podcast is uploaded every Wednesday morning, so you can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to listen. If you like to watch, you can check us out on YouTube as well. Also, Impact this Sunday, we'll be diving into a brand new series for both middle school and high school combined, so we're looking forward to that. And it's not just a series that we are doing, but it's actually our fall alignment series that we do as an entire church. So we'd encourage you guys to not only come to Impact, but also to be attending Big Church for this series in the upcoming weeks. So that kicks off on Sunday, so come Sunday morning and then come Sunday evening for Impact. We'll be talking about the same topic, but you'll get a different perspective each time. So it'll be really cool to build off of that. And again, Sundays at 5:30, the cafe is open, so you can come and hang out, get a drink before we start Impact. And then finally, Wednesday night hangouts after Awana from 8 to 9. You can come and be in the gym and the warehouse and just hang out, do homework, whatever it looks like, whatever exciting thing Brandon has planned. You'll just have to come and find out, I guess.
Last week it was full of cats that were exploding, people jamming out, Jesus being worshipped, and tricycle races. So
Good stuff.
yeah.
Good stuff.
That sounds fun.
I won. I just want to put that out there. I was the winner.
All right.
Some people may say I cheated, but
Probably. It's fine. It's fine. Joel, do you want to tell us
Yes.
about the song that we're listening to this
Yes.
week?
So this is a song called Make Room by Community Music. The version I listen to is Kim Walker because I just love Kim Walker. But it's still a great song either way. And one of the song basically is us surrendering to the Lord, and His ways are better than ours. And the chorus says, "I will make room for you to do whatever you want to," and the bridge basically says, "Your way is better." And really, I felt like that flows really well with what Emma said, right? Like she made room for whatever God wanted to do because His way was better. So yeah, that's the song, and I have had it on repeat for a while now.
It's one of those songs that we talked about a few weeks ago where sometimes it's a scary song to sing.
Yep, scary song to sing. But what's on the other side of that scariness is pretty awesome.
It is, yes. So it's a really great song. We'd encourage you guys to check that out. To start us off, again, we've been in this series talking about a deeper life with Jesus, and this past Sunday was all about saying yes to Jesus. Before we get deep into that, I got a fun question to start us off. I'm really excited to hear their answers. They have no idea what this question is, so I'm looking forward to it. But what is a question that if someone asked you at about any point in time that your immediate answer would be yes and you'd figure out how to make it happen after?
I have so many questions.
like how, like, where in the scale of like
For me, if somebody asks, "Hey, you want to go to Disney?" my answer is yes.
And you're
I'll figure it out later.
Yeah. So like, I guess like mine would be.
Well, I'm gonna cut you off. Mine's Chick-fil-A. Like no matter what.
So simple.
Yeah, I know. That's like too simple. It's too easy. So I need to think of a better one.
Hey, Chick-fil-A, yes.
Yeah.
Even on your tight budget, always yes.
Yeah, it's hard to say no, man.
I'll be honest with you. If somebody came to me and said, "Hey, we want you to come out on tour with us," Amy and I would be like, "Yes," and we'll make it happen. Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Cool.
Yeah, that's my thing. Yeah,
that's
100%.
a lot cooler than Brandon's.
I know. I was like, "Oh, it's so simple." Like yours also makes totally sense. Hey, we're going to Disney next week. Yep.
Great,
I'm figuring that sucker out. Yeah.
I think it.
Especially if someone said, "Hey, it's paid for. You just got to get there."
Oh,
You'd be
for
like,
sure.
"Yeah."
I'd be like, sorry, guys, you got impact. Somebody else can teach, or I'll record it
Right.
ahead of time. Like, I'll figure it out.
100%.
I think to answer this question for real,
I think you get two answers. I don't.
I always give two answers. It would probably be like if someone's like, I'm going to a Barcelona soccer game or a Newcastle United soccer game in Europe. I have a hard time saying no to that. So I'd figure it out.
Yeah, if you went there though, you'd never get to go to Chick-fil-A for like a decade.
That's okay.
Sure.
That's okay. It'd be worth it. I'll beg my mom.
I need to figure out when I studied abroad, we went to some soccer game and like a pro soccer game, but like I don't care.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
much about
yeah, I
soccer,
know.
So I have no idea. Like,
What country was it in?
it was in Italy. It was
Oh,
when
that's
we were
cool.
In Italy.
Yeah, that's
But,
cool.
Yeah, so
They're intense.
I'm gonna look up a picture and watch it be like Barcelona. I'm pretty
You
sure
saw
I
Lionel
have.
Messi. Ooh,
No.
man.
All right. Well, let's get into our real conversation here, talking about again a deeper life and saying yes. While all of those things maybe will enrich our lives, not in the same way that saying yes to Jesus will.
Mhm.
So this conversation is going to focus a lot on Joel and an experience you had. So do you want to just tell us about the experience that you had saying yes to God in a big way?
Yeah. So, out of high school, made poor life choices because I thought my way was better. I was at a point where I was like, God, I've followed you and I feel like it's not working. So I'm going to make life choices myself. That did not go well. And I ended up literally at the bottom of the barrel, feeling like I was figuratively eating the slop like the prodigal son was, right? And I was like, well, this has not worked out well. So I just came and I remember sitting in my parents' room and my hands up like this. Emma talked about that, right? Hands up, like, Lord, like.
If you're not watching, hands up.
Hands
like
up, palms up.
posture
Yeah,
receiving.
palms up, receiving. I just
Yeah.
was like receiving and giving. And I was like, Lord, I'm done doing it my way. I will say yes to whatever you say, to whatever you want me to do. Like, I will say yes. You have to promise me just one thing, that I will never feel like I am alone, that you have never left me. And God was like, deal. And I was like, all right, great. So I did the things that Emma said to do, right? To dwell. And I dwelled upon the Lord and said, what do you want me to do? And I felt like God said, great, I want you to go to New Zealand. And literally to the other side of the world. And I was like, yeah. And I sought the Lord. And he did some cool things in that. And to get me to New Zealand. But I said, I will say, and when I said I'd say yes and I'd go and do whatever you want me to, I felt like he was like, great, let's see if you really mean that. And that's where God took me to New Zealand. And from there, God has launched literally my life from that yes, which was scary.
Yeah, for sure. Would you expand a little bit about what did that dwell time or that process look like for you? Like if it was it one afternoon sitting down? Was it over a course of time? Like, what did you do during that time of dwelling? Like, if it's not something we've experienced, I think it's hard sometimes to picture. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So if you don't know me, silence makes me uncomfortable.
What?
And so, but I have learned over the years to enjoy the silence, and that's where I really enjoyed the silence. I had a buddy of mine who really encouraged me that meditation is a Christian attribute. Like, we meditate in the essence of like sitting in silence and hearing from God. And so that's what I did for about 2 months. I would spend time every day reading my word, seeking God, but then like listening. And that's where God really I started to hear his voice. And guess what? His voice sounded a lot like the Bible.
Shocking.
Right? And so I spent time just listening. Some days it'd be, 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. But a lot of the days was 5 minutes because that's really as much as I could sit in silence at that age. I was 19 or 20 years old. And I didn't know. I just knew that I wanted to hear God and I wanted to be obedient. And I just listened. And he told me I had options, and God said, I want you to do New Zealand out of those options. And, I got to do some cool stuff with my parents and really making sure that was God. But it had a lot to do with being in the Word, praying, and listening.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
When it comes, again, you talked about like, I don't think you're the only one that struggles with sitting and being quiet. And like this discipline of really listening to the Lord. Like, what, if you have any, like, what practical, like, if you find your mind wandering, like if students want to try and like incorporate this practice into their life, like what practical tips, and Brandon, you can answer too, like if you have any, like what does that look like? Like how do you quiet yourself, quiet your mind, and be able to really listen?
Yeah, like I go to a place of like darkness, like the Bible and the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talks about like going to your hiding place, like essence. So like I make sure it is quiet. Like I make sure that no one's gonna be around, that I can, like, I'm the person who has to turn off the lights because I'm a squirrel person. So like that's the thing. So when my mind starts to wander, my buddy told me like have a phrase or a verse that you're pondering on or whatever, or what it is. And so whenever I'm sitting in silence, especially then, it was like obedience. And that would remind me as I started to think about basketball, or I started to think about, friends or whatever it was that would, our minds wander. I have a word or a phrase or an image that I'm going to say to myself, to remind myself, nope, this is what I'm doing. And that's been really helpful for me. And I still do that to this day. I have a phrase or an image or a verse, and that reminds me to come back, because it's easy to just start to, I think about when we're driving and you hit those bumps along the side and reminds you, oh yeah, get back
Rumble
on the road,
strips,
right?
yeah.
Those are my rumble strips to remind myself what it is to get back on focus.
Absolutely.
I like how you mentioned it's a Christian attribute of our lives to meditate. There's a book the Sam Project's been going through where he talks about a chapter on meditation and what that looks like. And oftentimes we can see meditation as like this Eastern religion, like Buddhism, Hinduism, like they're the only ones who meditate. Like we don't do that. Where we do, and for those religions, they see meditation as a separation from the world, like to disconnect, and where we're meditating to connect. Yeah. We are meditating to connect with God, to be with Him, so we can engage this world in a better way. And so, like, to meditate, to find that silence, because we know, like, as you said, like, God in the quiet places, in our quiet places. That's when God is able to speak to us when we're away from our distractions. And like Joel said, that's in the dark, all alone. And that's great. And I've done that before, and it works. But I prefer not to do that, because then I'm really tired the next morning. So for me, and I've mentioned this before, I'll just keep saying it, it's walking. It's walking along a trail, listening to creation, and be able to just like tune everything else out. That's when I feel like I can meditate the best.
I would literally be seeing squirrels.
You would literally see squirrels.
I see the squirrels and I'm like, oh, that's cool.
I know. my buddy Tyler, the 6'9" guy, like that's what he does. He sitting in silence. He's like, that's a bad way for me. But he's like, get out in nature. Yeah. Do you have a?
For me, I also get pretty distracted pretty easily. So if I can be in a quiet space, that's the best. And sometimes it's certain spots, like in my house too. Like I have some kind of go-to spots that like I can feel like I would sit and hang out with a friend here, and and so like that's kind of how I picture it, where it's I'm just hanging out with a friend, and like waiting for him to show up and to speak. And so as we're listening, like another question that came to mind as we're talking about this, like, so obviously like we're being quiet to hear from God. Like, how do we discern or distinguish when the thoughts that pop into our head are our own distracting thoughts versus like, how do we know like, oh, that's the Holy Spirit like speaking to us?
I mean, some ways that I do it, and this is from mentors of mine and people who have been walking in the faith a long time. One of the things they would say is, one of the simplest way that I found is to say, hey, God, if this is you, keep it like persistent. If this is not you, let it flutter away like every other thought. And that's one way that God is really like, there have been times where I'm like, oh, I feel like this is God. Lord, if this is you, keep it. If it's not you, then let it go. And then I'll literally be like, wait, what was I even thinking about? And that's been really cool to be like, God, this. Or like, I've also said like, hey, God, if this is you, especially if I'm making a decision out of that, like if this is you, give me the ultimate peace.
Yeah.
If this is not you, make my stomach churn. And I've had him make my stomach churn. I go, that's definitely not great. This is awesome. And I think the biggest thing is like, and I'm sure you guys would say like, when you're wanting to be obedient, God honors that and will help you figure out what that obedience will look like. But it's that ultimate, like, you know, we quote Jeremiah 29:11 so much in the church these days, but no one wants to quote 12 or 13, right? Where it says, yeah, I have all this, but like the only way to understand what my purpose is for you is to seek me with all your heart. And to seek God with all your heart is sacrificial. And it's hard. But yeah, those are the things I would say is that God is just like, when I ask him like, hey, if this is you, keep the thought. If it's not, let it go. If this is you and I feel like, okay, this was you, give me ultimate peace in that decision that I'm about to make, or let my body churn and say no. And those have been things that I have gotten from men of the faith who have spoken that to me. And that's been, I still use those things to this day.
And again, the great thing of having people in your life too, like you can go to people and be like, you know, you mentioned this like with your parent, like having them be like God will confirm it in other people too. And like, and again, like if he's telling us, one, it's never going to go against scripture. Like that is
100%.
Like that is where you can start. Like it'll never go against scripture. So if you're like, oh, is this something he's maybe asking? Like, see what the Bible has to say about it. Like, and if you still unclear, like ask wise people around you. And so like that, those are some of the tools that God gives us that when we're unsure with what like we're hearing, like those are places that we can go to
He will
hear.
not contradict himself, and the word of God is the first thing and the last thing he gave us. So make sure you know that inside and out.
Yes,
Agreed.
absolutely. So going back to your experience, like going to New Zealand and choosing to say yes to that, like obviously like that was a yes to God. Like how did you, like beyond just that experience, how do you continue to say yes, continue to choose?
I mean, one of the things that I do, because this is who I am as a person, is I try to live 1 year at a time, in the essence of like, all right, God, what do you, and Amy, my wife and I have done this, like this is what we do. We say, Lord, where do you have us? Where do you want us? What do you want us doing? Okay, great. And we live that out for a year. And then as we get to at the end of a year, we pray to the Lord and go, hey, God, what do you have for us? And I think that's the essence of like, my life is yours. Emma talked about a canvas, and I loved this story because she's like, I had a canvas and I had already drawn all over it. And God said, hey, would you be okay if I like threw that out and started a blank one? And Emma was like, okay, right? Like, because we can get caught up in what life's going to look like in America or whatever. And God may say, hey, what if I have something different for you? And that's been really helpful to every year or everything, like saying yes. And like, I don't seek God for the year and be like, great, I'll talk to you in a year, right? It's still like, I'm still going to talk to you and sit and dwell with you and hear what you have to say. And God will have big yeses in life or little yeses in life. And he's always wanting to know, are you really the yes? And sometimes the little ones can be even harder. Because like, I always say this, like I have a neighbor who doesn't like me and has told my wife he doesn't like me. And I don't know why. And this past winter, God said, hey, I want you, and he's an older guy. And God said, hey, I just really was outside shoveling my own sidewalk. And I was like, hey, go do Bob's. It's like, no, Bob doesn't like me. I don't want to do Bob's. And it was a little yes, right? And he was like, I want you to do it. And I was like, fine. And no lie, as I was doing it for Bob, I had a hard heart when I started, and I had a soft, tender heart for Bob when I was done. And, you know, Bob may not want to talk to me, but Bob made me looked out his window and was like, man, Joel knows I don't like him. Why did he, you know? And so that was a very little yes that I think pays dividends for myself and maybe for my heart towards the other person.
And I think that's an important thing to touch on too. You know, Emma shared her big yes, like she went to Africa, right? And Joel's talking about this experience of saying yes looked like going to New Zealand, but all of our yeses are not necessarily going to take us out of the country. Like,
you
it
are
could
correct.
take us to our neighbor's house,
Yes.
or it could take us to that person in the lunchroom sitting by themselves. Like,
in the lunchroom sitting by
Yes.
themselves.
yeah.
Yes.
So our yeses don't have to always be big. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's so important for us to remember and to think about, that it doesn't have to be gigantic. And who knows what could lead from those small yeses.
who knows what those
The
small
Lord.
lessons.
He knows.
The Lord knows.
He knows.
You know, I had a mentor of mine. He's like, you know, if you think of your life as like yeses of filling up a bucket to God, a lot of times we like, when you fill up a bucket, it's usually small things that are being put in to fill up the bucket. Like I think of the
cup
thing,
game,
right? Yeah, the cup game
Teen
stuff,
Mania, yeah.
right? Like that was just us saying yes in a silly game, right? But like pouring it and being like, I'm just gonna fill up this bucket.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got a full cup, and sometimes it was a little cup, but you kept putting in what you had into that bucket. And so that's what I just like doing, whatever God. Sometimes it's the big yes, and sometimes it's Bob's sidewalk.
Little yeses, yeah, they're all yeses.
Yeah.
And again, like, we don't know how or what God has in store from those little
yes.
yeses, but what have you seen in some of the yeses you've said? Like, what have you seen? You already shared with Bob, like, your heart softening, right?
Yeah.
So, like, what are some other things that you've seen come out of deciding to say yes to Jesus?
I mean, every time I say yes, God has done, it's always something that like is amazing. I think of the young boy with his loaves and fish, right? Like there's 10,000 probably plus people, right? Men,
Yeah.
women, and children. And they're like, how do we feed all these people? And the guy's like, I got like fish for myself. And God's like, will you give it to me? Yes. Great. Watch all this craziness happen. And that is, I would say, every time I say yes, I've never once ever regretted it. Whether it's Bob's thing, going to New Zealand, quitting my job at Caribou. Honestly, quitting my job at Caribou, I wouldn't be here if I didn't quit that job, right? And God had something for me. You know, Jason, God was working through some stuff with Jason even in that season. And when, you know, Jason and I were having conversations, I was like, I really feel like God's maybe calling me into ministry. And Jason felt really confident then to be like, like he was like, Lord, if I'm going to leave, please have someone ready to take this spot.
Yeah.
Jason really wanted that. And God needed to take me out of my job, not have work,
Yeah.
right? Reconnect with him, my family, whatever, because I said yes to that. And then all of a sudden it opened Jason to say yes to his thing. And then I was able to say yes. And sometimes we don't understand. My yes might open the door for someone else's yes of freedom. And I think a lot of times what we may think is small might be huge for someone else. Emma said yes to share her testimony. And now that might open the door for other people to say yes and do big things. And Emma may never see what that answer was, but she said yes to the thing God asked.
Absolutely. So before we get to our last question that I've been asking this season, any closing thoughts or encouragement that you want to leave the students with?
Yeah, and that yes often, I would say often feels scary.
Yeah.
I think whether it's big or small, I even think about Heidi and I's life in the past 2 years. Like saying yes to leaving a solid community that we had in Montana to come out here to Rochester. And then even in the past year, saying yes to buying a house. Those are all scary things stepping into, but we felt the Lord was in both of those big decisions. And so we felt like we could say yes and step into it. And now being on the flip side, we're very thankful, and it's still scary. I think there's a lot of times where we're still like, God, what are we doing? But God reminds us gently, like, no, this is for his good, for his glory. And it's just like he keep on saying yes, and saying yes to little things. So if you're terrified of the yes, I want you to know that you're not alone.
Not alone.
You're
at
not
all.
alone in that yes. That even we can see examples throughout all the scriptures of people being scared to say yes to what God had for them.
Gideon.
But yeah.
Read that story. If you're scared to say yes, go read Gideon.
Yes. And God did all the work there. He showed up and blew a bunch of trumpets. And so God is with you when you say yes. He doesn't leave you when you say yes. And you have community like here at church or at another church, if you go to a different church, like that will walk with you when you say yes. So understand, like, it is a scary thing, but don't let your fear stop you from what God has for you.
Yeah. My two things are, don't compare your yes to someone else's yes.
Absolutely.
Our goal is to be more like Jesus. So if I go a foot in my yes and you maybe go 10 feet, there's no difference because we both got closer to Jesus. So do not compare your yeses to others' yeses. Emma went to Africa. You may need to go to your mission field in your yes to the person that you've been seen sitting alone at the lunch table, either all year or the last 2 years or whatever that is. And you've been drawn to that person. I promise you that's not you being drawn to that person. That's God drawing you to that person. And when you say yes, it gets easier to say yes. Is that like, that makes sense? Yeah. The more we say yes and God's like, great, watch how cool I am. You're like, oh, I could say yes next time. Yeah. So those are my two things.
Yeah, those are great. So as we wrap up, our last question, like always, is what is your next step this week?
I'm gonna. This is what if you listened a couple weeks ago, we had Trisha on, and she talked about being tunnel vision. And so I think just being open to saying yes when I'm like going from place to place, whether it's the grocery store or the gas station or just driving or just at my house doing work, whatever. So yeah, just like looking for more opportunities to say yes, as I'm just like going from point A to point B. So yeah.
Slowing down the busyness to hear God speak. We talked about that first week of walking in step with the Spirit.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I can get so cluttered that I'm not listening to my next step in the Spirit. And whatever, like, that's the thing. I just need to slow down my mind and shut off my phone and listen to the Spirit. Honestly, that's probably my big thing, is just shutting my phone off and allowing time to listen.
For sure. Mine this week, I think, is really focusing in on that desire piece that Emma talked about, and like being intentional about praying. Like it's not just like that he's going to give me all the things that I want in my life, but like, God, align my desires and my heart with your desires. And then when your heart is aligned with his desires for your life, it makes it a lot easier to say those yeses, because what he wants for you is what you want for your life. And so taking time to pray and to ask God, align my desires with yours for my life. So that's my step this week. Thank you guys for sharing those. And again, we'd encourage you to, what is your next step this week? Find somebody that you can be accountable with, and two, share your next step this week. And again, like, go out and do that. So as always, we're cheering for you. We love you guys. We hope that you have a great week. And with all that being said, we say go and be more like Jesus.